Hello, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I want to talk to you about my veggie garden and the fruits that we grow on our property. If you're new here, my name is Michelle. I garden in Atlanta, which is a zone 7B8A, and we grow all the things for our families on a quarter-acre plot. So your typical standard suburban property. If you're watching this video to gather inspiration and tips for how to start your own garden, I wanted to start off by giving you 3 tips when you're selecting where to set up your first veggie garden. First things first is that you don't need to start with raised beds. We started with an in-ground garden, made sure that that's what we wanted to do. We liked the location. So year 1, don't be shy about just dumping a bunch of compost that you get from your county or bags of garden soil into a cleared area and starting your garden that way. I think the first step is just doing it. I promise you'll learn a lot very quickly as to whether that's the right location for your family or not, and you won't be having to move raised beds later if it's not. The last 2 things are things you want to look for when you're picking your location. First off, your garden boxes need to be in a full sun area. That means that the area that you're picking gets at least 6 to 8 hours of sun. This is super important for fruit and veggie production and will make your garden experience 100 times easier in the future if you pick a spot with full sun. And the final tip is site your veggie garden or garden boxes close to your home. You're going to want to check on this a couple of times a week at the very minimum. So picking a location that's easy to get to or close to your back door or patio is going to be key for having an easy experience in the garden. Also, if this is a bonus tip, if at some point down the line you want to add irrigation to your raised beds and make your gardening experience even easier and more hands-off, having a location that's near a hose bib or near a location where you can add in a hose is going to be key for that. So just as a little something to keep in mind, you're going to want a full sun location. You're going to want a location that's easy to get to from your back door, front door, patio, whatever it is. And as a bonus, if it's near a hose bib, even easier. And lastly, don't feel pressured to create these gorgeous raised beds that you see on social media. A lot of the times, and what's true, especially in my garden, is these were created over many years. So the very first version of this was just an in-ground bed. And then after that, we added in different structures and things as we're learning and adapting for our garden space. But it's just something that evolves over time. And this definitely wasn't what my garden looked like on day 1. So enough with the inspirational advice. Let me show you really quickly what we've got growing this year in our 2 raised beds. So right behind me are the only 2 beds that I grow out of. Obviously, with the space that we have dedicated to growing veggies behind me, it's not going to be enough to sustain our family. So my goal isn't to produce all of the food that we eat. My goal is to have snacks readily available and a reason for the kiddos to come outside. This has really become part of our routine. So in the morning, after the kiddos get their shoes on and they get dressed for the day, they come out to check the garden for snacks. And that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted to have some snacks for the kiddos, and I wanted to have fresh tomatoes for tomato sandwiches, because is there really a better taste of summer than a tomato sandwich? Which, by the way, I hope everyone's doing this. You do the sliced tomato, it's gotta be mayonnaise, it's gotta be white toasted bread, and you have to have salt on top. That is my way of doing the best tomato sandwiches. I would love to hear how you like your tomato sandwiches or what your favorite thing to do with the tomatoes you produce in your garden. But primarily, this is kind of like a snack garden. So think of it that way. So let me show you what we've got growing this year. This is the first year that I've added cut flowers into what I've only reserved for as the veggie garden. I believe the act of mixing flowers with vegetables is known as potager, but to be honest, people use that all the time, and I truly have no idea what that word means, but I think that's about right. Or that's what Google tells me. So the vegetables that we have currently growing in this bed are snacking peppers. I actually forgot to start peppers from seed this year, so I got these from Home Depot. And then a peanut that came back from last year's garden experiment. I guess I must have missed one of the peanuts while harvesting last year, and it popped back up again this year. This bed also contains strawberries, or straw babies, as my daughter calls them. And strawberries are one of those crops that you buy once and then you have enough for life. They just spread by runners so epically. The real trick is getting any sort of harvest because everything seems to love strawberries. This year I added a couple of eggplants, mostly just for baba ganoush. These are Black Beauty eggplants that I started from Ferrymore seeds. Very easy to grow. They're small now, but once the weather gets hot, they explode. When you're growing with limited space, if you want to maximize that space, one way to do that is by adding obelisks or structures that allow you to grow up. This bed has a Facebook Marketplace find obelisk, and on it we have cucumbers growing and also a melon. I believe this is Minnesota midget. These are both things that my kids just love to eat. This year was also the first year that I've ever grown dahlias from seeds, and you guys, I'm obsessed, and also the bees are obsessed. Dahlias are actually surprisingly easy to start from seed. The seed packet cost me $2 and it's brought me so much joy. These seeds were from Pine Tree Garden seeds. The bees love it and I love it. It's just a win-win situation for very little money. I also bought a couple of tubers this year. This one is Melina Fleur. I found it at Home Depot. And I added in a couple of sunflowers to bring that joy and sunshine into this bed, as well as cosmos. These are all very easy cut flowers that you can start from seed. And what video would be complete without Sushi? She's basically my little garden shadow these days. And when she wants the pets, you've just got to give her the pets. Let me switch to the other side of the bed. Before that, I want to show you what's growing on my trellis. This trellis that I got was a very cheapo Aldi find. Like I said, before I commit to something expensive, I like to test it out and make sure I'm going to use it. I bought this 3 years ago and it's held up ever since. So on this trellis, I grow more cucumber because you can never really have enough tomato cucumber salads in the summer. And also I grow varieties of tomatoes that I didn't have room for in the tomato bed, but wanted to add in anyways. It ends up working out most years just fine because in Atlanta, we have a pickleworm problem, or I do anyways. So once the pickleworms come in the July-ish time frame, I remove the cucumbers and then the tomatoes have enough space to do their thing along the arbor. Speaking of tomatoes, this entire bed is almost entirely dedicated to tomatoes. I love growing them. They're one of my favorite crops to grow. They're so fun to grow. And we built this support structure that we keep up year round so that we can maximize our growing space in this bed. Let me tell you all about it. So this is the second version that we built of this trellis system. Previously, we just kind of had a rectangle outline, so the 4 posts on each side and then the top. When we rebuilt it, so this is version 2.0, we added in the lattice on either side so that we could grow more things vertically. So I have some cucumbers growing up and additional tomato plants on either side of the trellis as well. Anyways, the whole goal in this is to create a structure where you can drop a line, tie your tomato plant up, and then you're able to support each branch by wrapping it around the string, and you can grow more varieties of tomatoes in a smaller space this way. So I'm a huge fan of this setup for tomatoes, but it does involve a little bit of work. So in order to maintain the tomatoes in this type of arrangement, what that means is I have to prune away suckers. So I keep 1 to 2 liters on each of the tomato plants, and then everything else I'm going to prune away. Any of the suckers or the growths that are coming out between the main stem and a leaf node at a 45-degree angle, that sucker, it'll basically grow into its own tomato plant that you're gonna have to figure out a way to support. So I've done some creative supporting this year so that I can maximize my harvest, but basically what I can support, I keep. What I can't support, I don't keep, because if you can't support it, you can let it grow, you can let it start to produce flowers and fruit, but eventually a storm will take out that whole branch and it'll be wasted effort that you could have had fruit somewhere else that wouldn't topple over and break. Once you have this setup, it's really easy to maintain. Like I said, you have your string, and then I just wrap the tomato around the string, and that is enough support for the branch to where it won't break. If you're like me and also try to cram as many varieties as you can in one bed, another thing that's important to do is trim away some of the leaves, especially if it gets a little crowded, because it prevents airflow between the plants. So any of the leaves that are kind of crossing like this, I'm going to remove so that I can get airflow between the plants again. Last tip I'll give you is that I also remove the lower leaves so that any sort of soil-borne diseases don't splash up on the leaves. This also leaves room for underplanting with tomatoes, so I like to plant basil under the tomatoes. Also, the internet tells you to plant marigold near tomatoes because they act as a trap crop, and who knows, I don't know. Marigolds are pretty to me, so why not? This is one of those things that I'm just kind of blindly doing and not because I have some sort of proof that it's actually beneficial. I think it's a little bit of voodoo, but they're pretty, so why not? Speaking of pretty things in this bed, I also have some cut flowers that I started from seed. So I've got some more seed dahlias that look completely different than the other one, but bring me just as much joy. Bachelor buttons, which are starting to peter out as the heat starts to set in. Status, which is another super easy cut flower that you can grow from seed and has a very long vase life. Zinnias and gladioluses that I didn't know where to put because I bought a bag from Aldi that was $5 because why wouldn't you buy some beautiful flowers for $5? So they ended up here too. Lastly, I've got a little bit of a scallion patch going here. This started from scallions from the grocery store many, many years ago, and they bloom and reseed and self-sow. So it's been fantastic. Okay, I know I breezed through all of that pretty quickly. If you have any questions about creating raised beds or growing veggies or taking care of veggies, I would be super happy to do a follow-up video. I just want to make sure that whatever I'm sharing is relevant. So that's why I'm breezing through it, and I want to start talking about the fruits that I grow on this property and how I've tried to incorporate it into the landscape. So right behind me is our berry patch. Let's start there. So I'm standing right in front of the blueberries, and this is one of my kids' favorites and a very easy crop to grow in Georgia or the Southeast. I don't know if these are native to the Southeast, but I feel like they grow like weeds here. There's very little care that is required of blueberries. The trick is really keeping the birds, chipmunks, and squirrels away from your ripe fruit so that you can have some too. So I've got two different types of varieties of blueberries growing. I have the classic rabbit eye variety that you see at Home Depot, Lowe's, and your big box stores. These get huge. See what I mean? Huge. But they do produce really well and they're super tasty. So if you're looking for a blueberry variety that you can incorporate instead into your landscape and you don't have room for a giant blueberry almost tree, I recommend that you look at Monrovia's Bountiful Blue blueberry. It's a compact blueberry that has delicious fruit, but it doesn't get over 3 feet tall and 3 feet wide, which is the perfect size to incorporate into your existing landscape. Now, blueberries, if you didn't know, are actually really gorgeous shrubs. They're not just edible, they're very ornamental. In the early spring, you have beautiful white flowers that kind of remind me of pyrus or pyrus. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. And then obviously in the summertime, you get that great fruit. And then in the fall, blueberries have a really gorgeous color change. It's like a bright red leaf. So you get spring, summer, and fall interest. Blueberries are a really fun one. If you want to incorporate into the landscape, definitely look at Monrovia's Bountiful Blue blueberry. Another dwarf shrub that I really love and also fruits is pineapple guava. This is actually an evergreen shrub that has this amazing silvery foliage. It blooms in the spring. The blooms are edible and they kind of taste like marshmallows. And then you get fruit later in the summer. So this is a really fun one. There are varieties that grow huge. This is a plant from Southern Living Collection. It is Bambina pineapple guava, and it stays smaller, so it's easier to incorporate into your landscape. And then right behind me on this trellis, we have our brambles. So brambles are your raspberries and your blackberries. They fruit on canes, and they like to spread through runners. So highly recommend if you want to plant raspberries and blackberries, unless you want a whole field of them, that you contain them in a container. And then other than that, you just need some sort of vertical support system. There are shorter, more compact varieties that you can grow where you won't need a trellis system. It really just depends on how much space you have and what you're going for. But this is a very delicious, low maintenance, easy thing to grow. My favorite variety of raspberry is Fall Gold. It is incredibly delicious. We've also grown Heritage, but if you are going for only one variety, Fall Gold raspberry has 2 seasons of fruiting and it's so sweet. It's like candy. And then as far as raspberries, this right here is Triple Crown Thornless, which I got because of the kids. I figured thornless would be better. I'm switching over either to a prime arc variety or to Natchez. I want something that blooms a little bit earlier so that I get fruit before the pests come. So in addition to this corner here, we've also incorporated some fruit trees around the landscape. And if you have a small property, I highly recommend this. I personally don't have the space to have a dedicated orchard and a dedicated kind of ornamental landscape. So I like to sneak them in. Let me show you which trees I've snuck in and kind of how I've done that. So I'm standing right in front of a persimmon tree, and this is a perfect example of what I look for when I'm trying to figure out what's the right fruit tree to incorporate into our landscape. So what I'm looking for is a tree that is dwarfer in stature. I'm also looking for a fruit tree that might have multi-season interest. I'm also looking for a tree that has interesting features around it. And I'm looking for something that I will not have to spray. I like to fill my garden with pollinator plants, so I don't want to be spraying a fruit tree around any of the plants that I'm planting for the pollinators. I'd rather have a low maintenance fruit tree, and that is exactly what a persimmon is. A persimmon has these big, beautiful, glossy leaves. The fruit tends to ripen towards fall and early winter, so you almost get like a Christmas tree effect where it's a bare tree, no leaves, and these beautiful orange ornaments or fruit that you're able to pick. Plus, it's absolutely delicious. This is a Fuyu persimmon, and I would highly recommend, if you're trying to incorporate a fruit tree in your garden, to look at Fuyu persimmon. Next up is this fig tree that I added here in the corner. This is actually what is helping me create a shade garden in the future. This tree is small now, but in the future it will cast a large amount of shade, so I get to create a little shade garden underneath this tree. Another thing about figs is that you don't have to spray them at all. They don't require a second pollinator plant, so you can just have one fig tree and it will produce fruit. It is self-fertile. Also, figs are delicious, and I happen to really love fig jam, so it was a must-have in the garden. But lots of figs aren't dwarf, so this isn't a dwarf fig tree. I control the size by pruning it. If you are looking for a dwarf fig tree, there are many varieties out on the market that you can look at so that you can have a fig tree that fits your space. Pomegranate is another great tree that you can add to your garden. It's a beautiful fruit tree in many seasons. In the spring, you get these bright red, gorgeous flowers. Then obviously the fruit is very ornamental, plus it's delicious. So the work that goes into training a pomegranate tree is mostly just removing the lower suckers or branches that form. Otherwise, they're very hands-off and aren't really prone to any sort of diseases, so you won't need to spray this. If you're in Georgia and a citrus fiend like me, there are some trees that are coming out and being developed out of UGA that can be planted in the ground and are said to be cold hardy enough to withstand our winters. I'm kneeling next to Sweet Frost Tangerine, which came out of UGA, and I got this from Abundance Landscapes. If you're local to Atlanta and don't know about Abundance Landscape, they sell some of the coolest trees in their fall and spring tree sale that I don't see anywhere sold at nurseries, including the Sweet Frost Citrus series. This citrus is cold hardy to our zone, have survived this past year's winter, frostmageddon, whatever you want to call it. So a really cool tree to have. If you're local to Georgia and love citrus as much as me, this Sweet Frost Tangerine is supposed to be delicious. I will update you in the future when I get fruit. Maybe I'll do a live taste test or something. I'm just really excited and grateful to be able to plant citrus in Georgia in the ground. Another way to incorporate fruit trees into your landscape is by creating an espalier structure. Espalier is a way of training fruit trees to grow into a certain form. Yes, this looks expensive, but it's actually not expensive and something that I DIY'd myself. The trick is to find young trees that are already in a pretty good form for espalier. You could see I paid $30 for the Fuji apple tree and $40 for the pink lady tree. You want to make sure that the varieties that you're getting will pollinate each other and are compatible. And other than that, it's just creating the trellis system and then training over time. If you have the time, you can espalier too. I promise it is much easier than it might look. It is not a complicated DIY project. It just takes some patience. The last fruit tree that we have on the property is this nectarine tree behind me. I actually found this at Costco bare root a few years ago, and you can see the size of it now. It is a massive nectarine tree. My daughter loves nectarines, so I had to plant something. Now I will say that stone fruit and apples, if you want to prevent the black spots and diseases and you want perfect looking fruit, you will want to go ahead and spray. Apples and pears and stone fruits like nectarines and peaches and plums, they are more susceptible to certain diseases that'll cause like black ooey gooey spots or rust and things like that. So if you want to avoid all of that, you'll need to spray. But know that it's not one of those low maintenance trees where it'll produce fruit and it isn't susceptible to diseases and you don't need to spray at all. If you want perfect fruit on your nectarines and your apples and your pears, you're going to want to spray. But because my daughter loves nectarines so much, I had to add it to the garden. Lastly, if you're in an apartment or only have a patio or a very small space, know that you can grow many things in containers, especially things like citrus, dwarf fruit trees. There are dwarf versions of blackberries and blueberries and raspberries on the market. You don't have to have a full garden and your permanent home to be able to grow your own fruits. So I wanted to make sure that you knew that you don't have to have a large garden to grow fruit. You can incorporate it into the landscape. You can grow it in containers. There are so many different varieties out there for you to explore and enjoy and eat. I am super passionate about growing all the snacks for my family, and I could talk about this for ages. So I've kind of breezed through things, but I wanted to make sure that I touched on something that might be relevant without nerding out on it totally. If there's something that you want to see a follow-up video on or you have some questions about, I hope you don't hesitate to drop that into the comments. Like I said, I can nerd out and talk about this kind of stuff for a very long time, but I will stop for today. And I wanted to say thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you've already subscribed, if you're a garden nerd like me or you're garden curious, I hope you hit the subscribe button and like this video. I really appreciate you watching and see you in the next video.